Alright, hi everyone. Sorry. Oh my goodness. No, shut up. Just let me and my chat be. Sorry about that. I was food prepping earlier, and halfway through it I realized I was going to be going overtime, so I had to push back half an hour to 8. Hopefully I'll still have time to finish up tonight's story. I know I said that I was going to finish the Black Colossus on my own time, and I tried to get to it, but I was, you know me, I have a goldfish brain. So I was trying to get to it this afternoon, and Conan finally showed up 1/3 through the story, which, okay. I do like Robert E. Howard, but for this particular story, Conan should have appeared sooner, or at the very least, the prologue portions should have been shrunken down to a more condensed version, because the dude climbing up on the temple steps, why did that need to be stretched out so long? And also, the naked princess with her slave girl who wanted to go to the temple naked for some reason. Did that really need to last as long as it needed to? Really? But anyways, I did read enough to get to the point where Conan actually shows up. And alright, I'm trying to get to my comic shot show. And he does show up. Okay, long story short. Princess goes to temple. Asks God, what do I do? God says, go to the street. And the first man you see on the street is gonna help you through this. And she's like, aye. So she goes to the street, and she bumps into Conan, who is already drunk on wine, and he just got kicked out of the bars. And he doesn't even know she's the princess at first, so she thinks that, oh, you're just some, like, waif who's going around. Hey, you want to spend a night with me, waif? And she takes him back to the palace, and he's still not clicking for him that she's a noble. And he's like, oh, huh, are you waiting and waiting? And then when she finally reveals that she's a princess, he's like, fuck, this is a trap! But eventually, she explains the situation. Look, I know my country's not in the greatest spot right now, and this voice has been telling me he wants to conquer me, if you know what I mean. And I need you to help me solve all my problems, basically. And Conan's still not jiving with it, so she just gives him some wine and snackies, and then he's on board with it. She calls her council in, tells him, hey, this guy is going to be the leader of our army. They're not okay with it until she closes the curtains, swaps out whatever Conan was wearing for, like, noble armor, pulls back the curtain again. They see him in the armor and like, all right, fine, he's going to be our leader. It's like, okay, you finally get interesting 10 pages into a 30-page story. Which, look, I have respect for Robert E. Howard, but it's like, I don't think this was the best way to go about your writing, my dude. But anyway, so got you caught up in all of that. And I do find it very funny that Conan, he is suspicious. I mean, obviously he is, because pretty lady who happens to be linked to royal family, and she wants me to go with her alone with no guards to guard her. Like, that is suspicious. But I also find it very funny that just give him some snackies and he's fine with everything that's going on around him. It's a very funny Conan himself is a very funny dichotomy where he is intelligent, he does have street smarts, he does know how to fight, and he does know how to strategize, but he's also very much the average man, which is give him good foods, give him good sex, and he'll go along with whatever you want him to go along with. I'm not saying he's dumb, it's just he's a very simple guy, which I think are two different things in my opinion. Fire. There we go. I'm gonna take one last sip of my Soetic before we get started. Alright, so I'm starting on part 3 of Black Colossus. In the early haze of dawn, the streets of Coraja were thronged by crowds of people who watched the hosts riding from the southern gates. The army was on the move at last. Oh yeah, there's another plot point where apparently the princess is in power of the one naked chick, Yasmela. Apparently she's the one in power, and she was not putting 2 and 2 together that her brother being kidnapped, her armies being disenfranchised and going off to serve other armies is a bad thing. Sweetheart, was nobody telling you what the hell was going on in your own country? I mean, there's Bimbo, and then there is what the actual hell is wrong with you. And they're celebrating, yay, the army is finally doing shit. It's like, that is a hell of a low bar. Like, I'm sorry, that is a hell of a low bar. But anyway. There were the knights, gleaming in richly wrought plate armor, colored plumes waving above their burndish sellets. Their steeds, caparisoned with silk, lacquered leather, and gold buckles, carckled and curveted as their riders put them through their paces. The early light struck glints from lance points that rose like a forest above the array, their pennons flowing in the breeze. I don't know why I said in the bronze. Each knight wore a lady's token, a glove, a scarf, or a rose, bound to his helmet or fastened to his sword belt. They were the chivalry of Coraja, 500 strong, led by Count Thalestes, who, men said, aspired to the hand of Yasmela herself. Oh yeah, that's another plot point that happened earlier. Apparently, this dude has the glove of Yasmela, and because he wasn't doing dick-a-bet shit about all of the problems that were going on, she was like, okay, I know I gave you my glove, but give it back, because clearly you're not going to be helping in this situation. Which is a huge slap in the face. They were followed by the light cavalry on rangy steeds. The riders were typical hillmen, lean and hawk-faced, peaked steel caps were on their heads, and Shemetish bow, which would send a chef 500 paces. There were 5,000 of these, and Shupras rode at their head, his lean face moody beneath his service. These, like the knights, were of ancient Gothic blood, sons of ruined families, broken men, penniless youths, who could not afford horses and plate armor, 500 of them. Sounds charming. All right. 2 seconds. I am still here. It's just, for some reason, right as the reading started, my lips have decided to just dry up like the Sahara Desert, so I would try and push on, but it was really starting to bug me. Alright. The spearmen, The mercenaries brought up the rear, 1,000 horsemen, 2,000 spearmen. Tall horses of the cavalry seemed hard and savage as their riders. They made no curvets or gambits. There was a grimly businesslike aspect to these professional killers, veterans of blood campaigns. Clad from head to foot in chainmail, they wore their visorless headpieces over linked coifs. Oh, coifs. That's what that is. Their shields were unadorned, their long lances without guidons. At their saddle bows hung battle axes or steel maces, and each man wore at his hip a long, broad sword. The spearmen were armed in much the same manner, though they bore pikes instead of cavalry lances. They were men of many races and many crimes. They were tall Hyborians, gaunt, big-boned, of slow speech and violent natures. Tawny-haired gunnermen from the hills of the northwest, swaggering Corthornians, renegades, Swarthian Zingarians with bristled black mustaches and fiery tempers. Let's move you a little closer, my friend. There we go. Aqualians from the distant west, but all except the Zingarians were Hyborians. Behind all came a camel in rich housings, led by a knight on a great war horse and surrounded by a clump of picked fighters from the royal house troops. Its rider, under the silken canopy of the seat, was a slim, silk-clad figure, at the sight of which the populace, always mindful of royalty, threw up its leather cap and cheered wildly. Conan the Cimmerian, restless in his plate armor, stared at the bedecked camel with no great approval and spoke to Almeric, who rode beside him, resplendent in chainmail, threaded with golden breastplate. Not entirely sure why he had to say that twice, okay. And helmet with a flowing horsehair crest. The princess would go with us. She's supple, but too soft for this work. Anyways, she'll have to get out of these robes. Almeric twisted his yellow mustache to hide a grin. Evidently, Conan supposed Ismella intended to strap on a sword and take part in the actual fighting, as the barbarian women often fought. It's like, yeah, bitch, you're the one in charge. Why aren't you leading this army? Conan is anti-chauvinism, but it is very funny. The women of the Hyborians do not fight like your Sumerian women, Conan, he said. Ismella rides with us to watch the battle. Anyway, he shifted in his saddle and lowered his voice. Between you and me, I have an idea that the princess dares not remain behind. She fears something. An uprising? Maybe we'd better hang a few citizens before we start. Why don't we do just a smidge little purge before we leave, Conan? This is not how diplomacy works, Conan. Alright. No, one of her maids babbled about something that came into the palace by night and frightened Yasmela half out of her wits. It's some of Natak's delivery, I doubt not. Conan, it's more than flesh and blood we fight. Well, grunted the Cimmerian, it's better to go meet an enemy than to wait for him. He glanced at the long line of wagons and camp followers, gathered the reins in his mailed hand, and spoke from habit in the phrase of the marching mercenaries. Hell or plunder, comrades, march! Yay! He glanced at the long line of wagons and camp followers, gathered the reins of his mailed hand, and spoke from habit to oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I am rereading the same paragraph. Behind the long train, the ponderous gates of Gojra closed. Eager heads lined the battlements. The citizens well knew they were watching life or death go forth. If the host was overthrown, the future of Gojra would be written in blood. The horde soaring up from the savage south, mercy was a quality unknown. All day the columns marched through grassy, rolling meadowlands, cut by small rivers, the terrain gradually beginning to slope upward. Ahead of them lay a range of low hills, sweeping in an unbroken rampart from east to west. They camped that night on the northern slopes of those hills, and hook-nosed, fiery-eyed men of the hill tribes came in scores to squat about the fires and repeat news that had come up from the mysterious desert. Through their tales ran the name of Natak with like a crawling serpent. At his bidding, the demons of the air brought thunder and wind and fog. The fiends of the underworld shook the earth with awful roaring. He brought fire out of the air and consumed the gates of walled cities and burnt armored men to bits of charred bone. His warriors covered the desert with their numbers, and he had 5,000 Stygian troops in war chariots under the rebel Prince Kutamun. Okay. Conan listened unperturbed. War was his trade. Life was a continual battle, or series of battles since his birth. Death had been a constant companion. It stalked horrifically at his side, stood at his shoulder beside the gaming tables. Its bony fingers rattled the wine cups. It loomed above him, a hooded and monstrous shadow. When he lay down to sleep, he minded its presence no more than a king minds the presence of his cupbearer. Some day its bony grasp would close. That was all. It was enough that he lived through the present. However, others were less careless of fear than he. Striding back from the sentry lines, Conan halted as a slender cloaked figure stayed him with an outstretched hand. "Princess, you should be in your tent." I could not sleep. Her dark eyes were haunted in the shadow. "Conan, I am afraid." "Are there men in the host you fear?" His hand locked on his hilt. "No man," she shuddered. "Conan, is there anything you fear?" He considered, tugged at his chin. "Aye," he admitted at last. "The curse of the gods." Again she shuddered. "I am cursed. A fiend from the abyss has set his mark upon me. Night after night he lurks in the shadows, whispering awful secrets to me. He will drag me down to be his queen in hell. I dare not sleep. He will come to me in my pavilion as he came in the palace. Conan, you are strong. Keep me with you. I am afraid." Sorry, I heard knocking. She was no longer a princess, only a terrified girl. Her pride had fallen from her, leaving her unashamed in her nakedness. In her frantic fear she had come to him who seemed strongest. The ruthless power that had repelled her drew her now. For answer he drew off his scarlet cloak and wrapped it about her, roughly, as if tenderness of any kind were impossible to him. He just plopped the thing onto her. His iron hand rested for an instant on her slender shoulder, and she shivered again, but not with fear. Like an electric shock, a surge of animal vitality swept over her at his mere touch, as if some of his superabundant strength had been imparted to her. "Lie here," he indicated a clean sweep space close to a small flickering fire. He saw no incongruity in a princess lying down on the naked ground beside a campfire, wrapped in a warrior's cloak, but she obeyed him without question. Yeah, I do love how these stories just keep pointing out that Conan doesn't get society, he doesn't get civilization, so he just does I'm just doing what I'm used to for my tribe, and he doesn't understand that this is not how people in different civilizations do things, and he gets very frustrated by it very often. It's kind of funny. He seated himself near her on a boulder, his broadsword across his knee, with a firelight glinting from his blue steel armor. He seemed like an image of steel dynamic power. For the moment, quiescent, not resting but motionless for the instant, awaiting the signal to plunge again into terrific action. The firelight played on his features, making them seem as if carved out of substance shadowy yet hard as steel. They were immobile, but his eyes smoldered with fierce life. He was not merely a wild man, he was part of the wild, one with the untamable elements of life. In his veins ran the blood of the wolf pack. In his brain lurked the brooding depths of the northern night. His heart throbbed with the fire of blazing forests. So, half meditating, half dreaming, Yasmela dropped off to sleep, wrapped in a sense of delicious security. Interesting way to put that. However, she knew that no flame-eyed shadow would bend over her in the darkness, with this grim figure from the Outlands standing guard above her. Yet once again she awakened to shudder in cosmic fear, though not because of anything she saw. Uh-oh, shit's gonna happen. Okay, 10 more pages. That's not too bad. Sorry. Trying to top off my Zoetic there. Give me a minute. Things have just not been going my way in the last hour. Things have just been either falling out of my hands or whatnot. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm cursed. It was a low mutter of voices that roused her. Opening her eyes, she saw that the fire was burning low. A feeling of dawn was in the air. She could dimly see that Conan still sat on the boulder. She glimpsed the long blue glimmer of his blade. Close beside him crouched another figure, on which the dying fire cast a faint glow. Yasmela drowsily made out a hook-beak of a nose, a glittering bead of an eye under a white turban. The man was speaking rapidly in a Shemite dialect she found hard to understand. Let bell weather my arm, I speak truth. By Derkato, Conan, I am a prince of liars, but I do not lie to an old comrade. I swear by the days when we were thieves together in the land of Zamora. Before you dawned, Haruk, I saw Natok. With the others, I knelt before him when he made incantations to set. But I did not thrust my nose in the sand as the rest did. I am a thief of Sumir. My sight is keener than a weasel's. I squinted up and saw his veil blowing in the wind. It blew aside, and I saw. Bell, aid me, Conan, I say I saw. My blood froze in my veins, and my hair stood up. What I had seen burned my soul like a red-hot iron. I could not rest until I had made sure. I really wish they had these stories in this book in chronological order of when they were supposed to take place, because I'm trying to think back to, okay, who are you and why should I care about you? Because apparently he knows Conan, and apparently this happened in a story before, but okay, fine, you knew Conan, whatever. I journeyed to the ruins of Kuthshemis. The door of Ivory Dome stood open. In the doorway lay a great serpent transfixed by a sword. Within the dome lay the body of a man, so shriveled and distorted. Wait a minute. Hold on. Is this a callback to... Is this a callback to the god in the bowl? Is that what this is? From what I understand, he didn't have any friends in that story. Okay, whatever. We're gonna continue on and see if there's more context. Door Iron Dome. Oh, maybe he was the thief from that was in the prologue, the dude who was like dying on the steps of the temple he was trying to rob. And then the prologue kind of just was like going on and on and on and on and on about the history of the place. Okay. Alright, there we go. I know what we're talking about now. Door of the Ivory Dome. Within the dome lay the body of a man, so shriveled and distorted I could scarce make it out at first. It was Shavatus, the Zamorian, the only thief in the world I acknowledged as my superior. The treasure was untouched. It lay in shimmering heaps about the corpse. That was all. There were no bones, began Conan. There was nothing, broke in the Shemite passionately. Nothing, only the one corpse. Silence reigned an instant, and Yasmela shrank with a crawling, nameless horror. Whence came Natok? Rose the Shemite's vibrant whisper. Out of the desert on a night when the world was blind and wild, with mad clouds driven in frenzied flight across the shuddering stars, and the howling of the wind was mingled with the shrieking of the spirits of the wastes. Vampires were abroad that night, witches rode naked on the wind, and werewolves howled across the wilderness. Vampires and werewolves exist in this world now. Alright. On a black camel he came, riding like the wind, and an unholy fire played about him. The cloven tracks of the camel glowed in the darkness. When the talk dismounted before Set's shrine by the oasis of Afaka, I think that's how it's pronounced, the beast swept into the night and vanished. And I have talked with tribesmen who swore that it was suddenly spread gigantic wings and rushed upwards into the clouds, leaving a trail of fire behind it. No man has seen that camel since that night, but a black, brutish man-like shape shambles to Natok's tent and gibbers to him in the blackness before dawn. I will tell you, Conan, Natok is... Look, I will show you an image of what I saw that day by Shushan when the winds blew aside his veil. Yasmela saw the glint of gold in the Shemite's hand as the men bent closely over something. She heard Conan grunt, and suddenly blackness rolled over her. For the first time in her life, Princess Yasmela had fainted. Oh boy. Dawn was still... Part 4. Dawn was still a hint of whiteness in the east when the army was again on the march. Tribesmen had raced into camp, their steeds reeling from the long ride, to report the desert horde encamped at the well of Altaku? So through the hills the soldiers pushed hastily, leaving the wagon trains to follow. Yasmela rode with them. Her eyes were haunted. The nameless horror she had been taking even more awful shape. Since she had recognized the coin in the Shemite's hand the night before. One of those secretly molded by the degraded Zugite cult? Jeez. Bearing the features of a man dead 3,000 years. The way wound between ragged cliffs and gaunt crags, towering over narrow valleys. Here and there villages perched, huddles of stone huts and plastered with mud. The tribesmen swarmed out to join their kin, so that before they had traversed the hills, the host had been swelled by some 3,000 wild archers. Abruptly they came out on the hills and caught their breath at the vast expanse that swept away to the south. On the southern side, the hills fell away sheerly, marking a distinct geographical division between the Kothian uplands and the southern desert. The hills were the rim of the uplands, stretching in an almost unbroken wall. Here they were bare and desolate, inhabited only by the Sahimi clan. Mr. Howard, you and just inventing new words to confuzzle me. Alright. Hills. Beyond its horizon lay the well of Altaku and the horde of Natok. The army looked down on the pass of Shamala, through which flowed the wealth of the north and the south, and through which had marched the armies of Koth, Korasha, Shem, Turan, and Stygia. Here the sheer wall of the rampart was broken. Promotorians ran out into the desert, forming barren valleys, all but one of which were closed on the northern extremity by rugged cliffs. This one was the pass. It was much like a great hand extended from the hills. Two fingers parted formed a fan-shaped valley. The fingers were represented by a broad ridge on either hand. The outer sides sheer, the inner steep slopes. The vale pitched upward as in narrowed to come out on a plateau flanked by gauntly torn slopes. A well was there, and a cluster of stone towers occupied by the Zahimis. There Conan halted. Swinging off his horse, he had discarded the plate armor for a more familiar chainmail. Thespids reined in and demanded, "Why do you halt?" "Well, wait here," answered Conan. "'Twere knightly to ride out and meet them," snapped the count. "They'd smother us with numbers," answered the Cimmerian. "Besides, there's no water out there. We'll camp on the plateau." "My knights and I camp in the valley," retorted Thespius angrily. "We are the vanguard, and we, at least, do not fear a ragged desert swarm." Conan shrugged his shoulders, and the angry nobleman rode away. Amalric halted in his bellowing order to watch the glittering companion riding down the slope into the valley. "The fools! Their canteens will soon be empty, and they'll have to ride back up to the well to water their horses." "Let them be." Conan's like, fuck them. "Let them be," replied Conan. "This goes hard for them to take orders from me. Tell the dog brothers to ease their harness and rest." Dog brothers? Wonder if that's slang for something. "We've marched hard and fast. Water the horses and let the men munch. No need to send out scouts." The desert lay bare to the gaze, though just now this view was limited by low-lying clouds which rested in whitish masses on the southern horizon. The monotony was broken only by a jutted tangle of stone ruins, some miles out on the desert. Reputedly the remnants of an ancient Stygian temple. Conan dismounted the archers and ranged them along the ridges with the wild tribesmen. He stationed the mercenaries and the Karashi spearmen on the plateau about the well. Farther back, in the angle where the hill road debauched on the plateau, was pitched Yasmila's pavilion. With no enemy in sight, the warriors relaxed. Bastinets were doffed, coifs thrown back on mailed shoulders, belts let out. Rude jests flew back and forth as the fighting men gnawed beef and thrust their muzzles deep into ale jugs. Along the slopes, the hillmen made themselves at ease, nibbling dates and olives. Oh, olives exist in this universe, alright. And dates. Amalric strode up where Conan sat bareheaded on a boulder. Conan, have you heard what the tribesmen say about Natok? They say, Mitra, it's too mad even to repeat. What do you think? Seeds rest in the ground for centuries without rotting sometimes, answered Conan. But surely Natok is a man. I am not sure, grunted Amalric. At any rate, you've arranged your lines as well as a seasoned general could have. It's certain Natok's devils can't fall on us unawares. Mitra, what a fog. I thought it was the clouds at first, answered Conan. See how it rolls. What had seemed clouds was a thick mist moving northward, like a great unstable ocean, rapidly hiding the desert from view. Soon it engulfed the Stygian ruins and still rolled onward. The army watched in amazement. It was a thing unprecedented, unnatural, and inexplicable. No use sending out scouts, said Amalric disgustedly. They couldn't see anything. Its edges are near the outer flanks of the ridges. Soon the whole pass and these hills will be masked. Conan, who was watching the rolling mist with growing nervousness, bent suddenly and laid his ear on the earth. He sprang up with frantic haste, swearing. Horses and chariots, thousands of them. The ground vibrates to their tread. Ho there! His voice thundered across the valley to electrifying the loungemen. Braggots and pikes, you dogs! Stand to your ranks! At that the warriors scrambled to their lines, hastily donning headpieces and thrusting arms through shield straps. The mist rolled away, and something no longer useful. It did not slowly fade like a natural fog. It simply vanished, like a blown-out flame. One moment the whole desert was hidden with the rolling, fleecy billows piled mountainously, stratum above stratum. The next, the sun shone from a cloudless sky on a naked desert, no longer empty but thronged with the lively pageantry of war. A great shout shook the hills. Like I said, Conan knows his shit. So he's not dumb, it's just his specialty is war. And war is a very specific specialty. At first glance, the amazed watchers seemed to be looking down upon a glittering, sparkling sea of bronze and gold, where steel points twinkled like myriad stars. With the lifting of the fog, the invaders had halted as if frozen, in long, serried lines flaming in the sun. First was a long line of chariots, drawn by the great fierce horses of Stygia, with plumes on their heads, snorting and rearing as each naked driver leaned back. Bracing his powerful legs, his dusky arms knotted with muscles. The fighting men in the chariots were tall figures, their hawk-like faces set off by bronze helmets crested with the crescent supporting a gold ball. Heavy bows were in their hands. No common archers these, but nobles of the south, bred to war and the hunt, who were accustomed to bringing down lions with their arrows. I think he's trying a different style here because he's a lot more descriptive in this story than he is with his other stories. Behind these came a motley array of wild men on half-wild horses, the warriors of Kush, the first of the great black kingdoms of the grasslands south of Stygia. They were shining ebony, supple and lithe, riding stark naked and without saddle or bridle. After these rolled a horde that seemed to encompass all the desert, thousands on thousands of the warlike sons of Shem, ranks of horsemen in scale-mail corselets and cylindrical helmets. The either that's Aspuri or Ashuri of Nippur, Shmir, and Urik, and their sister cities, white-robed hordes and nomad clans. Now the ranks began to mill and eddy. The chariots drew off to one side, while the main host became uncertainly onward. Down in the valley the knights had mounted, and now Count Thespides galloped up the slope to where Conan stood. He did not ding or deign to dismount, but spoke abruptly from the saddle. The lifting of the mist has confused them. Now is the time to charge. The Kushites have no bows, and they mask the whole advance. A charge of my knights will crush them back into the ranks of the Shemites, disrupting their formation. Follow me. We will win this battle with one stroke. Yeah, that's a trap. Conan shook his head. Were we fighting a natural foe, I would agree. But this confusion is more feigned than real, as if to draw us into a charge. I fear a trap. Then you refuse to move? Cried Thespides, his face dark with passion. Be reasonable, expostulated Conan. We have the advantage of position. With a furious oath, Thespides wheeled and galloped back down the valley, where his knights waited impatiently. Amalek shook his head. You should not have let him return, Conan. Look there! Conan sprang up with a curse. Thespides had swept in and beside his men. They could hear his impassioned voice faintly, but his gesture towards the approaching horde was significant enough. In another instant, 500 lances dipped, and the steel-clad company was thundering down the valley. A young page came running from Yasmela's pavilion, crying to Conan in a shrill, eager voice, My lord, the princess asks why you do not follow and support Count Thespides. Because I am not so great a fool as he, grunted Conan, reseating himself on the boulder and beginning to gnaw a huge beef bone. You grow sober with authority, quoth Amalric. Such madness as that was always your particular joy. Aye, when I had only my own life to consider, answered Conan. Now, what in the hell? No, that is in the book. What in the hell is in the book? I swear it is actually in here. The horde had halted. From the extreme wing rushed a chariot, the naked charioteer lashing the steeds like a madman. The other occupant was a tall figure whose robe floated spectrally on the wind. He held in his arms a great vessel of gold, and from it poured a thin stream that sparkled in the sunlight. Along the whole front of the desert horde, the chariot swept, and behind its thundering wheels was left, like the wake behind a ship, a long, thin, powdery line that glittered in the sands, like the phosphorescent track of a serpent. "That's no joke," swore Almaric. "What hellish seed is he sowing?" The charging knights had not checked their headlong pace. Another 50 paces and they would crash into the uneven Kushite ranks, which stood motionless, spears lifted. Now the foremost knights had reached the thin line that glittered across the sands. They did not heed that crawling menace, but as the steel-shod hooves of the horses struck in, it was when steel strikes flint, but with more terrible result. A terrific explosion rocketed the desert, which seemed to split apart along the strewn line of an awful burst of white flame. That's why you don't go charging in head first without knowing exactly what you're charging into. In that instant, the whole foremost line of the knights was seen enveloped in that flame. Horses and steel-clad riders withered in the glare like insects in an open blaze. The next instant, the rear ranks were piling up their charred bodies, unable to check their headlong velocity. Rank after rank crashed into the ruins with appalling suddenness, and the charge had turned into a shambles where armored figures died amid screaming, mangled horses. Now the illusion of confusion vanished as the horde settled into orderly lines. The wild Kushites rushed into the shambles, spearing the wounded, bursting the helmets of the knights with stones and iron hammers. It was all over so quickly that the watchers on the slope stood dazed, and again the horde moved forward, splitting to avoid the charged wastes of corpses. From the hills went up a cry, "We fight not men, but devils!" On either ridge the hillmen wavered. One rushed toward the plateau, froth dripping from his beard. "Flee, flee!" he slobbered. "Who can fight Natok's magic?" With a snarl, Conan bounded from his boulder and smote him with the beef bone. He just bopped him on the head with the beef bone. Okay, come on. You gotta do something else slightly more dignified than that. Alright. Give me a second. I'm going to set another thing on fire here. Boop. Alright. Alright, beef bone. There we go. He dropped, blood starting from nose and mouth. Conan drew his sword, his eyes slits of blue bale fire. "Back to your posts," he yelled. "Let another take a backward step, and I'll shear off his head. Fight, damn you!" The rout halted as quickly as it had begun. Conan's fierce personality was like a dash of ice water in their whirling blaze of terror. "Take your places," he directed quickly, "and stand to it. Neither man nor devil come up Shamal Pass this day." Where the plateau rim broke to the valley slope, the mercenaries braced their belts and gripped their spears. Behind them, the lancers sat their steeds, and to one side were stationed the Kojura spearmen as reserves. To Yasmela, standing white and speechless at the door of her tent, the host seemed a pitiful handful in comparison to the thronging desert horde. Conan stood among the spearmen. He knew the invaders would not try to drive a chariot charge up the pass in the teeth of the archers, but he grunted with surprise to see the riders dismounting. These wild men had no supply trains. Canteens and pouches hung at their saddle peaks. Now they drank the last of their water and threw the canteens away. "This is the death grip," he muttered, as the lions formed on foot. "I'd rather have had a cavalry charge. Wounded horses bolt and ruin formations." The horde had formed into a huge wedge, of which the tip was the stallions and the body, the mailed I'm just gonna go Ashuri, flanked by the nomads. In close formation, shields lifted, they rolled onward, while behind them a tall figure in a motionless chariot lifted wide-robed arms in glistening invocation. As the horde entered the wide valley mouth, the hillmen loosened their shafts. In spite of the protective formation, men dropped by the dozens. The stallions had discarded their bows, helmeted heads bent to the blast. Dark eyes glared over the rims of their shields. They came on in an inexorable surge, striding over their fallen comrades. But the Shemites gave back the fire. The clouds of arrows darkened the skies. Conan gazed over the billowing waves of spears and wondered what new horror the sorcerer would invoke. Somehow he felt that an attack, like all his kind, was more terrible in defense than in attack. To take the offensive against him invited disaster. Interesting way to think about that. But surely it was magic that drove the horde on in the teeth of death. Conan caught his breath at the havoc wrought in the on-sweeping ranks. The edges of the wedge seemed melting away, and already the valley was strewn with dead men. Yet the survivors came on like madmen, unaware of death. But the very numbers of their bows, they began to swamp the archers on the cliffs. Clouds of shafts sped upward, driving the hillmen to cover. Panic struck at their hearts at the unwavering advance, and they piled their bows madly, eyes glaring like trapped wolves. As the horde neared the narrower neck of the pass, boulders thundered down, crushing men by the scores, but the charge did not waver. Conan's wolves braced themselves for the inevitable concussion. In their close formation and superior armor, they took little hurt from the arrows. It was the impact of the charge Conan feared, when the huge wedge would crash against his thin ranks, and he realized now there was no breaking of that onslaught. He gripped the shoulder of a Sahimi who stood near. "Is there any way by which mounted men can get down into the blind valley beyond the western ridge?" "Aye, a steep, perilous path, secret and eternally guarded, but..." Conan was dragging him along to where Amalric sat his great war horse. "Amalric," he snapped, "follow this man." He just grabs dude, shoves him into the other general's face, be like, "Do what he say!" He'll lead you into yon outer valley. Ride down it. Circle the end of the ridge and strike the horde from the rear. Speak not, but go. I know it's madness, but we're doomed anyway. We'll do all the damage we can before we die. Haste! Amalric's mustache bristled in a fierce grin. Oh, he has been waiting for this. And a few moments later, his lancers were following the guide into a tangle of gorges leading off from the plateau. Conan ran back to the pikemen, sword in hand. He was not too soon. On either ridge, Seppura's hillmen, mad with anticipation of defeat, rained down their shafts desperately. Men died like flies in the valley and along the slopes, and with a roar and an irresistible upward surge, the Scythians crashed against the mercenaries. In a hail of thundering steel, the lions twisted and swayed. It was Orbred noble against professional soldier. Shields clashed against shields, and between them spears drove in and blood spurted. Conan saw the mighty form of Prince Gutamun across the sea of swords, but the press held him hard, breast to breast, with the dark shapes and gasped and slashed. Behind the Scythians, the Asuri were surging and yelling. On either hand, the nomads climbed the cliffs and came to hand grips with their mountain kin. All along the crests of the ridges, the combat raged in blind, gasping ferocity, tooth and nail, frothing mad with fanaticism and ancient feuds. The tribesmen rent and slew and died. With hair flying, and naked Kushanites ran howling into the fray. It seemed to Conan that his sweat-blinded eyes looked down into a rising ocean of steel that seethed and eddied, filling the valley from ridge to ridge. Oh yeah, this scene is really being dragged out. The fight was at a bloody deadlock. The hillmen held the ridges, and the mercenaries, gripping their dripping pikes, bracing their feet in the bloody earth, held the pass. Superior position and armor for a space balanced the advantage of overwhelming numbers, but it could not endure. Wave after wave of glaring faces and flashing spears surged up the slope, and Ashuri filling the gaps in the Estonian ranks. Conan looked to see Amalric's lances rounding the western ridge, but they did not come, and the pikemen began to reel back under the shocks, and Conan abandoned all hope of victory and life, yelling a command to his gasping captains. He broke away and raced across the plateau to the Kojura reserves, who stood trembling with eagerness. He did not glance towards Yasmela's pavilion. He had forgotten the princess. His one thought was the wild beast instinct to slay before he died. "This day you become knights," he laughed fiercely, pointing with his dripping sword toward the hillmen horses herded nearby. "Mount and follow me to hell!" Plenty of guys who would just do that anyways. The hill steeds reared wildly under the unfamiliar clash of the Kothian armor, and Conan's gusty laugh above the din as he held them to where the eastern ridge branched away from the plateau. 500 footmen, pauper partisans, young sons, black sheep, on half-wild Shemite horses charging an army down a slope where no cavalry had ever dared charge before. Past the battle-choked mouth of the pass, they thundered out onto the corpse-littered ridge. Down the steep slope they rushed, and a score lost their footing and rolled under the hoofs of their comrades. Below them, men screamed and threw up their arms, and the thundering charge ripped through them as an avalanche cuts through the forest and saplings, on through the close-packed throngs of the Korasians hurtled, leaving a crushed-down carpet of the dead. Sorry. Had a burp trapped in me. And then, as the horde writhed and coiled upon itself, Amalric's lancers, having cut through a cordon of horsemen encountered in the outer valley, swept around the extremity of the western ridge and smote the host with a steel-tipped wedge, splitting it asunder. His attack carried all the dazing demoralization of a surprise on the rear. Thinking themselves flanked by a superior force and frenzied at the fear of being cut off from the desert, swarms of nomads broke and stampeded, working havoc in the ranks of their more steadfast comrades. These staggered and the horsemen rode through them. Okay, that's how the sentence is. Upon the ridges, the desert fighters wavered, and the hillmen fell on them, with renewed fury driving them down the slopes. Stunned by surprise, the horde broke before they had time to see it was but a handful which assailed them. And once broken, not even a magician could wield such a horde again. Across the sea of heads and spearmen, Conan's madmen saw Amalric's riders forging steadily through the rout, to the rise and fall of axes and maces, and a mad joy of victory exalted each man's heart and made his arm steel. Bracing their feet in the wallowing sea of blood, whose crimson waves lapped about their ankles, the pikemen in the pass mouth drove forward, crushing strongly against the milling ranks before them. The Stygian held, but behind them the press of the Ashuri melted, and over the bodies of the nobles of the south who died in their tracks to a man, the mercenaries rolled to split and crumple the wavering mass behind. Up on the cliffs of old Shapurus laid, with an arrow through his heart, Amalric was down, swearing like a pirate. He was cursing up a storm. A spear through his mailed thigh. Of Conan's mounted infantry, scarce 150 remained in the saddle, but the horde was shattered. Nomads and mailed spearmen broke away, fleeing to their camp where their horses were, and the hillmen swarmed down the slopes, stabbing the fugitives in the back, cutting the throats of the wounded. In the swirling red chaos, a terrible apparition suddenly appeared before Conan's rearing steed. It was Prince Kutamun, naked but for a loincloth, his harness hacked away, his crescent helmet dented, his limbs splashed with blood. With a terrible shout, he hurled his broken hilt fully into Conan's face, and leaping, seized the stallion's bridle. The Cimmerian reeled in his saddle, half stunned, and with awful strength, and the dark-skinned giant forced the screaming steed upward, backward, until it lost its footing and crashed into the muck of bloody sand and writhing bodies. Conan sprang clear as the horse fell, and with a roar, Gotamun was on him. In that mad nightmare of battle, the barbarian never exactly knew how he killed his man. He only knew that a stone in the Stygian's hand crashed again and again on his bassinet, filling his sight with flashing sparks as Conan drove his dagger again and again into his foe's body without apparent effect on the prince's terrible vitality. The world was swimming into Conan's sight when, with a convulsive shudder, the frame that strained against his stiffened and went limp. Take a breather there. Reeling up, blood streaming down his face and from under his dented helmet, Conan glared dizzily at the profusion of destruction which spread before him. From crest to crest the dead lay strewn, a red carpet that choked the valley. It was a red sea, with each wave a straggling line of corpses. They choked the neck of the Red Sea. They choked the neck of the pass. They littered the slopes, and down the desert the slaughter continued, where the survivors of the horde had reached their horses and streamed out across the waste, pursued by the weary victors. And Conan stood appalled as he noted how few of these were left to pursue. Then an awful scream rent the clamor. Up the valley a chariot came flying, making nothing of the heaped corpses. No horses drew it, but a great black creature that was like a camel. In the chariot stood Natok, his robes flying and gripping the reins and lashing like mad. Crouched a black anthropomorphic being that might have been a monster ape. With a rush of burning wind, the chariot swept up the corpse-littered slope, straight toward the pavilion where Ismela stood alone, deserted by her guards in the frenzy of pursuit. Conan, standing frozen, heard her frenzy scream as Natok's long arm swept her up into the chariot. Then the grisly steed wheeled and came racing back down the valley, and no man dared speed arrow or spear, lest he strike Yasmela, who writhed in Natok's arms. Oh no! With an inhuman cry, Conan caught up his fallen sword and leapt onto the path of the hurtling horror. But even as his sword went up, the 4 feet of the black beast smote him like a thunderbolt and sent him hurtling a score of feet away, dazed and bruised. Yasmela's cries came hauntingly to his stunned ears as the chariot roared by. A yell that had nothing of the human in its timbre rang from his lips as Conan rebounded from the bloody earth and seized the rein of the riderless horse and raced past him, throwing himself into the saddle without bringing the charger to a halt. With mad abandon he raced after the rapid receding chariot. He struck the levels flying and passed like a whirlwind through the Shemite camp. Into the desert he fled, passing clumps of his own riders and hard spurring desert horsemen. "Fuck the battle! The hot princess is in danger!" On flew the chariot and on raced Conan, though his horse began to reel beneath him. Now the open desert lay all about him, bathed in the lurid, desolate splendor of sunset. Before him rose the ancient ruins, and with a shriek that froze the blood in Conan's veins, the inhuman charioteer cast Natok and the girl from him. They rolled on the sand, and to Conan's dazed gaze, the chariot and its steed altered awfully. Great wings spread from the black horror that in no way resembled a camel, and it rushed upward into the sky, bearing in its wake a shape of blinding flame, in which a black man-like shape gibbered in ghastly triumph. So quickly it passed that it was like the rush of a nightmare through a horror-haunted dream. Natok sprang up, cast a swift look at his grim pursuer, who had not halted but came riding hard, with sword swinging low, and spattering red drops, and the sorcerer caught up the fainting girl and ran her into the ruins. Conan leaped from his horse and plunged after them. He came into a room that glowed with unholy radiance, though dark dusk had fallen swiftly. On a black jade altar lay Yasmela, her naked body gleaming like ivory in the weird light. Her garments lay strewn on the floor, as if ripped from her in brutal haste. Natok faced the Cimmerian, inhumanly tall and lean, clad in shimmering green silk. Oh God, is he gonna rape her? He tossed back his veil, and Conan looked into the features he had seen depicted on the Zagat coin. "I bench, dog!" The voice was like the hiss of a giant serpent. "I am Thugra Kotham. Long I lay in my tomb, awaiting the day of awakening and release. The arts which saved me from the barbarians long ago likewise imprisoned me. But I knew one would come in time, and he came to fulfill his destiny, and to die as no man had died in 3,000 years. Fool, do you think you have conquered because my people are scattered? Because I have been betrayed and deserted by the demon I enslaved? I am Thugra Khotan, who shall rule the world despite your paltry gods. The desert is filled with my people. The demons of the earth shall do my bidding, as the reptiles of the earth obey me. Lust for a woman weakened my sorcery. Now the woman is mine, and feasting on her soul I shall be unconquerable. Back, fool! You have not conquered Thugrakotan." He cast his staff, and it fell at the feet of Conan, who recoiled with an involuntary cry. For as it fell, it altered horribly. Its outline melted and writhed, and hooded cobra reared up hissing before the horrified Cimmerian. Kind of interesting how much snake imagery is in these stories. And there at his feet lay only the two pieces of a severed ebon staff. Thugrakotan laughed awfully, and wheeling, caught up something that crawled loathsomely in the dust of the floor. And in his extended hand, something alive writhed and slavered. No tricks of shadow this time. In his naked hand, Thugrakotan gripped a black scorpion, more than a foot in a foot in length. That's a big boy. His naked hand, Thugrakotan gripped a black scorpion, a foot in length, the deadliest creature in the desert, and stroked the stroke of whose spiked tail was instant death. Thugrakotan's skull-like countenance split in a mummy-like grin. Conan hesitated. Then, without warning, he drew his sword. Caught off guard, Thugrakotan had no time to avoid the cast. The point struck beneath his heart and stood out a foot behind his shoulders. He went down, crushing the poisonous monster in his grasp as he fell. Conan strode to the altar, lifting Yasmela in his blood-stained arms. She threw her white arms convulsively around his mailed neck, sobbing hysterically, and would not let him go. "Crom's devils, girl," he grunted. "Loose me. 50,000 men have perished today, and there is work for me to do." "No," she grasped, clinging with convulsive strength, as barbaric for the instant as he in her fear and passion. "I will not let you go. I am yours by fire and steel and blood. You are mine. Back there, I belong to others. Here I am mine and yours. You shall not go." He hesitated, his own brain reeling with the fierce upsurge of his violent passions. Lurid unearthly glow still hovered in the shadowy chamber, lighting ghostly the death face of Thukerkoten, which seemed to grin mirthlessly and carnivorously at them. On the desert, the hills among the ocean of dead, men were dying and howling with wounds and thirst and madness, and kingdoms were staggering. Then all was swept away by the crimson tide that rode madly in Conan's soul as he crushed fiercely in his iron arms the slim white body that shimmered like a witch-fire of madness before him. All right, that was Black Colossus, and gotta be honest, guys, I don't think that was Howard's best work. Like, the Scarlet Citadel was much better, and the Tower of the Elephant was much better. But I don't think that one was his best work. I think he was trying too hard to make his work sound more, literature. But people appreciate him for being more to the point and just getting straight to it. So the style, it's like, I appreciate you trying out a new style, but it does not work, which, hey, it happens. Alright, so the next story is Iron Shadows in the Moon, and Conan does actually appear within like the first page of the story. So we'll see how that turns out for next week. As for Monday's stream, we're going to do Steve Ditko, and I'm going to do something that I haven't done with my other creator author things. Okay, usually I just look up a couple of interviews and I just react live to the interviews. But with Steve Ditko, you can't do that because Ditko is well known for being a hermit. And so I'm going to have to figure out a different way to cover this man, because there's only like a few clips of him speaking and like very few interviews that are less than 20 minutes long. Because I don't want to do a whole react to an interview. If anything, I would just recommend the interview. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next week. And I hope you all have a great Slowdown Sunday. Bye.